I don't deserve to be here. They're going to realise I'm not as smart as they think I am. What if no one wants to hear what I have to say? What if I don't actually have an idea worth spreading? I'm not good enough to be here. I'm such an idiot. What was I thinking? I can't do this. Have you ever told yourself even one of these stories? If you have, you are not alone. As a professional facilitator and executive performance coach, I work with hundreds of people every year, and these are the sorts of stories I hear them say. And these are successful people, smart people, interesting people, all kinds of people. If you are one of these people, you know just how unhelpful and limiting these stories can be. You might not speak up in a meeting, even when you have something important to say. You might not stand up for yourself and ask for what you need. You might not take that opportunity to share an opinion or progress an idea or speak in public. You might undermine your own decisions, question the legitimacy of your own voice, and step back from being the best version of yourself. And as you do this, you might diminish your own value, your own self-worth and confidence, and step away from your goals and dreams. Now, decades of research in cognitive behavioural therapy suggest to us that it is our stories, as well as some facts, that inform how we feel about a situation. And it is how we feel that inform how we behave. So, if you want to spend more time being the best version of yourself, you need to check your stories. Now, storytelling is a fundamental part of being human. We have been telling stories for as long as we have been communicating. Stories help us to make sense of the world, to understand ourselves and others. Think of creation and origin stories like those shared by Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, or the 100 or more mythologies and fables from around the world. Stories can help us to define who we are, to set a roadmap to lead us to the best version of ourselves, and along the way, identify opportunities as well as potential hazards to avoid. And along the way, we use our facts and stories in understanding and responding to these potentially life-threatening hazards that present themselves in the form of either physical pain or social pain. Now, I think most of us understand physical pain. Falling and hurting yourself, being hit by a heavy object, being attacked by a predator. Social pain, on the other hand, is often associated with stories that suggest that we may not be meeting our own expectations of ourselves, or that we may not be meeting what we believe to be other people's expectations of us. And so social pain can feel like embarrassment, ridicule, humiliation, losing face, and ultimately rejection. Being rejected by the group, by your group. And as far as your brain is concerned, being rejected by the group is as life-threatening as any physical pain. You see, the part of our brains associated with social pain hasn't evolved much for thousands of years. And thousands of years ago, we lived in much smaller groups. And these small groups were often separated by great distances. So being separated from the group often meant being physically isolated, which made us more vulnerable to predators and therefore to death. So even today, your brain still associates the potential for social pain with death. So anticipating feelings like embarrassment, humiliation, ridicule, losing face as a result of the stories you've told yourself serve as a warning for your brain of a hazard ahead, a hazard that may result in you being rejected by the group and ultimately dying, a hazard you need to avoid at all costs, Which is why when we tell ourselves unhelpful and limiting stories about everyday events like speaking up in a meeting or public speaking, we can experience the same fight, flight, freeze responses we might otherwise expect when faced with a very real physical threat. And you all know what those feel like: racing heart, cold, clammy, shaky hands, dry mouth, fast, short breathing, feeling nauseous, feeling sick to your stomach, brain fade, not being able to concentrate, not being able to think clearly. These symptoms are a result of your amygdala sending distress signals which trigger your sympathetic nervous system. This in turn triggers the release of adrenaline and cortisol, your stress hormones, which course through your body, triggering other physical changes which allow you to easily respond to the threat. Why do we feel nauseous, sick to our stomach when we think about speaking up in a meeting or speaking in public? Well, it's because your body is actually getting ready to eliminate all of your waste products so you can run away as quickly as possible. Why do you go blank in the middle of a job interview that you have planned so well for? Because if you've told yourself a story that suggests you need to flee, you have no need for those higher level logical, rational reasoning functions. Blood drains from the part of your brain responsible for thinking and speaking clearly and goes to your arms and legs. Now, for some people, there are other reasons, other underlying conditions why they may experience these fight, flight, freeze responses. And it's important that I acknowledge that it may not always be as simple as just saying, check your stories. But when it comes to the role that our brains play in identifying and responding to social pain, that's not in question. That's not necessarily true for the origins of these unhelpful, limiting stories that we tell ourselves. You see, the stories that we tell ourselves are often based on the stories we hear from others. But the stories that others tell are often for a specific purpose, from a specific perspective, the perspective of the individual or group telling the story. But if we're not challenging those stories, if we're not critically thinking about those stories, they can sound like facts, and we can almost unconsciously take them on, and they become our own unhelpful, limiting stories. Think about the stories we hear from traditional and social media, how they define success, how they define desirability. Think about the stories we hear from family, friends, and society about how people like us should behave. What makes people like us valuable or not? Think about the stories you hear in the form of a really insensitive comment made at a moment in your recent or distant past, a comment made out of ignorance or insecurity or for no good reason at all. Now, the problem is your brains don't automatically separate out those helpful stories that get you to being the best version of yourself and those unhelpful, limiting stories. And if you repeat those unhelpful, limiting stories often enough, stories like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, no one's going to want to hear what I have to say, they can start to sound like facts. And your brain sees them as credible stories, that they're credible signs of credible hazards, and they can feel like they're controlling us. I like to think we've got a little bit more control over our stories than that. And in fact, decades of research in cognitive behavioural therapies suggest that to a very large extent we do. So, if you're prepared to accept that it is our stories, along with some facts, that inform how we feel, and it is our feelings that inform how we behave, then if you want to have more control over how you behave, you need to be able to check your stories. So here's an idea I think is worth spreading. If you want to spend more time being the best version of yourself, check your stories every day. Check your stories every day in 5 simple ways. 1, define the best version of yourself unapologetically. Know who you are, know who you want to be, and set your expectations accordingly. 2, understand that your brain uses both facts and stories when identifying potential opportunities and potential threats. 3, learn to recognize those unhelpful limiting stories, those stories that step you back from being the best version of yourself. Do that by recognizing those fight, flight, freeze responses and work back from there. 4, once you have identified an unhelpful limiting story, ask yourself 3 questions. What evidence do I have that this story is true? 2, how is the story helping me? And 3, is it possible that there's a better story? And what I love about this question is that the answer is always yes. There is always a better story. So the 5th and final step is to create that better story. Create a better story that gets you back to being the best version of yourself. And that story need only be as simple as, I am enough. And you are. You are enough. We all are. And that is a fact. Thank you.